There's a chill in the air and the smell of fall is all around. And nothing says fall to me like the sweet and smoky flavor of maple. And the best part is that it's easy to make, and I'll show you how. I'm Trent Musho, and this is the Brew Show. Let's toast to fall with this delicious maple brown ale. Brown ales are an often forgotten and underrated style. They can have a rich malt backbone, and to me, are the perfect beer for a cool fall day. And to bring home those fall flavors, I'm going to be adding in real maple syrup, as well as testing out some other techniques to incorporate that smoky sweetness. Before we get started, please take a second to subscribe so you can learn more about how to brew your own beer at home. Now, let's brew. For this recipe, I'm making a 5-gallon batch using the brew in a bag method. As always, I'll have links for the recipe and the products I use in the description box. To start, I heat up 6 gallons of water to 160 degrees. I'm adding some water adjustments to improve the flavor, and I'm going for a balanced brown ale profile. It's not required, but if you're interested in taking your beer to the next level, I recommend you look into water adjustments. They can have a major impact on your brew. Once the water is heated up, I add the grain bag and then the grains. For that, I'm using 78.4% Maris Otter to give the beer a good, well-rounded malt flavor, 7.8% Victory Malt for some added breadiness, 3.9% Crystal 60 to add some caramel sweetness as well as add color, and 3.9% Chocolate Malt to really punch your color to a browner SRM. Lastly, I'll add 5.9% maple syrup at the end of the boil for added fermentable sugars, and hopefully by adding it late in the boil, we'll extract more of the maple flavor and aromas. I recently got this grain mill, and it significantly increased my efficiency, or how much sugars I extract out of the malts. You absolutely do not have to have this to make beer. For years I had my grains milled at the homebrew store, and I made plenty of delicious beer. But by doing that, you're at the mercy of how large or small the gap is at the homebrew store. For brew in a bag, you can tend to mill much finer, since you don't have to worry about getting a stuck mash. So I made my gap as small as the thickness of a credit card and crushed away. I recommend investing in a mill if you're planning to brew a lot of beer. I plan to mash at 152 for 45 minutes. 152 is the standard temperature for the mash and will give us a good balance of body and fermentability. After the 45 minutes, I heat up 2 gallons of water to 170 degrees. This hot water is for sparging. Sparging is the process of rinsing the grains, in this case the grains in the bag, to wash off any remaining sugars that might be within the bag. Just another technique to improve efficiency and get the most out of your malts. First, I pull the grain bag out, squeezing as much of the wort out as I can, and then I simply pour the water over the grain bag, allowing the liquid to fall into the kettle. The added sparge water will increase our extraction, but will also increase the total wort volume and lower our current specific gravity. That's just something to keep in mind, but remember that when we boil, we'll also be concentrating the wort, so we can get those gravity points back. Once the sparge water is added, I bring the wort to a boil, and I plan to boil for 30 minutes. At the start of the boil, I add a half ounce of Magnum for clean bitterness. Then at the 15-minute mark, I add a half ounce of Willamette for a total of 21 IBUs. I'm not looking for a ton of flavor from these hops, just mainly bitterness. Also at the 15-minute mark, I add a wort chiller, and if you have a Whirlfloc tablet, you can throw that in too. I kind of forgot. When the 30 minutes are up, I turn off the heat and add 12 ounces of maple syrup. Since maple syrup is a sugar, most of the flavor will be gone by the time the yeast has eaten through it. But my thought is by adding it here at the end of the boil, we'll get more flavor and aroma, much like you would do for hops in a whirlpool. What's your favorite fall flavors to play with? Have you ever tried using maple in a beer before? I'd love to know. Let me know in the comments. Now I turn on the wort chiller and chill down to 65 degrees. I also take an original gravity reading and get 1.064. When the wort is chilled down, I transfer into the fermenter. For this beer, I'm using Old Faithful SafAle US 05 American Ale yeast. I pop an airlock on and let this ferment at 65 degrees for 7 days. While that ferments, I want to talk about other ways to add maple flavor. Through my research, I found that an ingredient often used to mimic maple flavor in pancake syrups or other maple products is something called Fenugreek. Fenugreek often comes in seed form and is used in Indian cuisine. So I headed over to my local Indian grocery store to pick some up. Mine was labeled as methi seeds. The best way to extract flavor out of spices or other adjuncts that will be added post-fermentation is to make a tincture. Now in full disclosure, I didn't end up using the tincture in my recipe, but I wanted to show you anyways, in case anyone was curious about using this ingredient in their home brews. If you've used fenugreek before, I'd love to know about your experience. To make the tincture, I added 2 tablespoons of the fenugreek to a small mason jar and topped up with vodka. I let that sit on the counter for 7 days, and by the end of the week, the liquid had turned a dark brown and had a slight maple scent. When the tincture was ready, my beer was also wrapping up fermentation. I collected 3 samples of the beer, and using a pipette or small liquid dropper, I dosed each glass with a small amount of the fenugreek tincture at different rates. Even at a dosing of 1 milliliter tincture to 100 milliliter beer, I felt the flavor was too strong and had a bit of an unpleasant bitter spice to it. I by far enjoyed the maple brown ale sample without any tincture added. It has smoky notes coming from that chocolate malt and the actual maple syrup I added. For my own experiment, I added some sweetener to the tincture, and it really did taste like maple syrup flavor, but I just didn't feel it worked in this beer. Back to the beer. Once the airlock bubbling slowed down, I took a final gravity reading and got 1.012, meaning this ale comes in at 6.8%. We officially have beer. So then I began to transfer into a keg. I purged the keg with CO2 before opening it up and turning the spigot on my fermenter. Having a spigot on the fermenter makes transferring into bottles or kegs very easy. I highly recommend you add one if you can. I then added 5 milliliters of Biofine Clear, a vegan alternative to promote clarity in beer. I then closed up the keg and set the PSI to 30 and burst carbonated the keg for 24 hours before reducing the pressure down to serving pressure. And after a few days, it was ready to drink. Immediately off the keg, I get a whiff of roasty, sweet, smoky flavor that's reminiscent of a campfire or burning fall leaves. The color is a deep brown from that chocolate malt. And honestly, I think I could have dialed that back a little bit to get slightly less brown, but to me, the real proof is in the flavor. Immediately on my first sip, I'm hit with a smoky, roasty flavor that's followed by a light hint of maple. There's a decent amount of bitterness there which balances out that sweetness that we got from our malts, and a touch of a nutty, smoky caramel flavor that keeps me coming back. If you enjoy smoky maple flavor and you like brown ales, you have to give this recipe a try. I can't wait to be sipping on this all November long. Easy to make and even easier to drink, and perfect to sip on while you're sitting in front of a warm fire. Cheers! If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. And while you're here, check out some of my other videos.